Today's Learn IT to Teach Avenue webinar is from New Language Solutions. New Language Solutions is based in Ottawa, Ontario. We acknowledge that our head office is on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Beyond Ottawa, we have staff working in locations across Canada. New Language Solutions is grateful to have the opportunity to work as a guest in communities and territories across the country, and we honor the stewardship of the many Indigenous peoples who have resided on these lands since time immemorial. Please welcome our webinar facilitator, Margaret Stasiak, Margaret Stasiak. She is an adult ESL educator that has been working in the language training and settlement sector for quite a while. Her recent employment includes working for Avenue and also for the Halton Catholic District School Board as an e-learning support specialist and developer. In this webinar, Flipping a Classroom on Avenue, Ideas and Teaching Tips, Margaret will discuss ideas, principles, and benefits of using a flipped classroom model and cover the basics of its planning. She will also present sample activities and teaching tips that can help enhance students' active learning experience and develop self-directed learning strategies. This webinar is a part of the series dedicated to better teaching practices on Avenue. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Learn IT to Teach Avenue YouTube channel. Thank you, Margaret. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, John, and welcome everyone to this webinar. As John mentioned, it is about flipping a classroom using Avenue resources and using the Avenue platform. So in this webinar, what I'm going to talk about is briefly, I'm just going to define what a flipped classroom is and talk a little bit about its principles and the theoretical background that goes with it. I'll talk about benefits and drawbacks of using a flipped classroom in a language instruction because a flipped classroom is not necessarily something that comes to mind when we think about language learning and teaching. I'm going to also discuss how you can set up a lesson based on a flipped classroom model and discuss and go over some ideas, activities, and tips that you can apply to content that comes from either e-units available on Avenue or your own content that you can bring in or supplement the e-units with. And also I'll talk about other considerations that may come up in the process of introducing a flipped classroom in your course or maybe teaching it and the challenges that you may face as well as your students may face. So let's get going. So what is a flipped classroom? Well, as the name indicates, it's the teaching model, instructional model that really flips the traditional teaching model used in an in-person classroom and uses the possibilities that arise from that process of flipping it. So in a traditional classroom, what we really focus on is the process of presentation and then practice and then application. Now, it usually happens in the classroom, specifically in person. And very often, it is followed by an assigned independent piece of work that the student needs to complete, something that would review what was done in class or maybe reinforce the specific aspects of the lesson. Now, in a flipped classroom, that process is turned around and it starts with assigned independent work that is completed by students on their own, not necessarily during the class time. And then it is followed by in-class lesson activities that really built on what was completed by students independently. Now, a flipped classroom is nowadays most often typically associated with online instruction, but it is not necessarily just bound to that. A flipped classroom the model of the flipped classroom can be applied in any environment, so it can also be used in an in-person teaching. And it really relies on the independent work that is done by students prior to the lesson activities. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about theoretical stuff here. So the flipped classroom, this model was actually first tried and applied by two high school teachers who just came up with this idea that it actually might be more beneficial for their students and more productive in their instruction to apply this moment. So this model. So what they did, they introduced this in their teaching practices on a daily basis, and this is how it all started. And it started in a face-to-face class. And then with the introduction of online learning and its popularity with different types of courses, the flipped model started being more popular in those modalities. But also what I wanted to say that flipped classroom is not typically associated with language learning and teaching. So a flipped classroom started really as a model of instruction in typical subject courses, so university courses, college courses, high school courses. Language learning is different. Language courses are different. And this is what poses a big challenge, actually, in terms of what a flipped classroom can offer to teachers and students in this environment. Now, there's a at the end of this presentation, I provide the references that I used throughout. But also you can see here there are 4 pillars of the flipped classroom, which really form the acronym of FLIP. So flexible environment, learning culture, intentional content, and professional educators. And it really focuses these 4 pillars or these 4 concepts really provide the background on which the whole concept is built. So flexible environment really refers to the varied environments that a flipped classroom can be used in. So it means that the flipped classroom can be applied in in-person teaching, or in-person classroom can be in a blended modality, in a fully online modality with a synchronous and asynchronous component. And it can be also applied in the classroom where online component is included during the class time. So students work on computers in class with the teacher's supervision. Now, learning culture, and it's probably one of the biggest concepts here that really creates the basis for this model. The learning culture refers to a different type of learning that students are exposed to and gain practice in. And learning culture in a flipped classroom is based really on student autonomy. So it's very important that students learn how to work independently, how to take responsibility for the completed work, and feel responsible for their learning overall. Intentional content, another concept that is listed here, refers to the content that is used and designed and used by the teacher in the whole process of in the model of the flipped classroom. So it is very important to keep in mind that not every content that is used during a typical lesson is suitable for a flipped classroom, for an asynchronous independent learning component. And therefore, the teacher needs to take additional time in the planning process and thinking what is appropriate for this type of teaching, this type of lesson. And finally, professional educators. That pillar really refers to the role of the teacher. And the role of the teacher is quite different from that what we have in a typical classroom, where the teacher is the driving force behind all the activities that happen in the classroom. In this model, the teacher really shifts the responsibility for the learning onto the students, and it is really an and creates an environment that empowers the students, motivates them for the learning, and provides feedback as well. So the learners become more independent and self-directed in the whole process of language learning. Now, so as I mentioned, all these pillars that are outlined in that acronym, summarizing the concepts of the flipped classroom really cover all these pedagogical approaches that I just wrote in here, and I'm just going to go over them very quickly. So basically, the most important principle and approach that is applied in a flipped classroom is a shift from the teacher to the student, as I mentioned. So it is empowering the student. It's giving them this sense of the responsibility for their learning, and making them more empowered and realizing how much their learning depends on their own work and their own strategies applied in the learning process. Now, the flipped model also uh, provides room for consideration for different learning styles and individual needs of different students. And we know that, as we noticed in our in-person classes, students tend to work in different pace. They may, some students are shy, may not be able to present their ideas or even provide answers to questions in front of the whole class. Others learn better by um, taking notes and writing down the information. Some of them may need additional support, such as using a dictionary or even a translator. So, shifting the learning from teacher focused to student focused allows learners to apply their own learning styles to their learning, and also can allow for a better response to their individual needs. Now, another aspect that is really important, an important part in a flipped classroom is collaborative learning. So collaborative learning or cooperative learning or group learning is the learning that happens in the in-class component of a flipped classroom. So it's really the time that is dedicated to group interactions, pair interactions, and whole class activities. This gives gives students more time for learning from one another, hearing what other students have to say, and interacting in a different environment. Now, another pedagogical approach that is really an inherent part of a flipped classroom is project-based and problem-solving learning. So while the students have an opportunity and ability to build all the micro skills in the asynchronous time, the in-class component allows them to work together on projects such as presentations, role plays, discussions that have a result and result in something. Problem solving, again, when they need to come up with a solution or maybe with the product of their activities. And again, it is part of the it's closely related to collaborative learning because again, students learn from one another. And active learning, because that learning is really uh, a different form of learning instead of being just a passive receiver of what the teacher is saying. Learners are actually discovering new concepts, new vocabulary, grammar, and structures on their own, and then reinforcing them in the classroom in the in-class component. So, just a few examples of items that can be, or types of activities that can be done in a classroom are listed here. So, as I mentioned, typically in a flipped classroom, the assigned independent work happens first. And it really builds the basis for all the other interactions and fluency practice and skill using tasks that happen in the in-class component. So the activities that are assigned for independent work need to be scaffolded and need to be very carefully selected so the learners can complete them on their own. In the situation when we're teaching in an online modality or maybe blended modality, you may choose the content that is available online. And that content can include videos, screencasts, or web pages with background information, um, especially for higher level students, guided practice exercises such as vocabulary practice, grammar drills, or grammar focused practice activities, sentence structure, idiomatic expressions, and phrasal verbs. I don't know, anything that you can think of that requires this repetitive, focused, and structured practice that can be done by students on their own, as well as listening and reading texts. So if the focus of the lesson is listening or reading, um, this is something that I would not choose for an independent work completed by the student. But if the focus of the lesson is, for example, giving a presentation or preparing for a presentation, a listening or a reading text that sets the context for in-class tasks, prepare the students for the interactions that happen, or gives them background information, these types of listening and reading texts would be appropriate to be completed by the students on their own. Now, in a flipped classroom, what happens in class is really the gist of the practice, language practice. So all the communicative practice that involves interactions in pairs, in small groups, large groups, and even whole class would happen during that time. An in-class component can be virtual during the Big Blue Button session, for example, or a Zoom session, or can happen in person if you're teaching a blended class. Now, as I just listed a few examples here, so these types of activities would include whole class discussions, brainstorming sessions that really require interacting with other students in groups, presentations, but delivering presentations, or maybe developing content for presentations that requires the participation of other students, and skill building activities that have a specific focus that was not part of the assigned asynchronous work completed by students. And then group and pair skill using activities and tasks such as small group discussions, pair role plays, interviews, guided practice activities, and exercises and project work. And these activities can be done again, in the virtual or in-person class. You can use breakout rooms in case of the virtual classroom, or just the regular class settings in-person classes. Now, the question that everybody's always asking is, can a flipped classroom really work in language instruction? And are we missing something if we're actually using this model? So there are a few challenges that you may actually encounter, and I kind of divided them into two groups. So the first group is logistical challenges, and that refers really to class times, class size, formats and modalities that are applied in your course. So, for example, it depends depending on how long your class is, you may choose to use a flipped classroom model to assign really just a small amount of work to be completed by the student, because you may want to dedicate the in-person component for all the interactions. Again, depending on your class, if you're teaching a blended class, I think a flipped classroom is actually a perfect model for this modality. If your class happens online 100%, it might be a little bit more challenging, and the students may not have enough time to complete the assigned material. So it really requires quite a lot of flexibility on your part as well as a teacher. And what is really important that I wanted to say, if you choose to use a flipped classroom model, you don't have to apply it to every lesson that you teach in your course. You would just choose the lessons that work better in this model and choose maybe a different model if this is something that works for you. And what is really important is to have this ability to assign the work for the asynchronous time in your class. So it is important that your class includes both synchronous and asynchronous time. If it is not built within the time the schedule of your class, very often students are willing to work on things as part of their homework, but it's done before another class and do things on their own. Now, another option, especially with the lower CLB level classes, is something that I call the hamburger model, which is really a model where you use the asynchronous time, synchronous time or in-person time, and again, asynchronous time to assign different activities. So really, it is introducing certain skill building activities before the most important part of the lesson, then teaching the lesson using all the practice activities and skill using activities in that time, and then debriefing or assigning another kind of a review or revision practice exercises in the asynchronous time. And that model works better with low-level students because you still have a chance to debrief and review what was done in the initial asynchronous component. And then you can always come back to or prepare the students for the final element of that lesson, which is again the asynchronous or homework component. Now, a flipped classroom can pose some challenges when it comes to it can pose some challenges for students as well. So, students in our classes come with different study habits. Some of them don't have study skills developed. They may need to be introduced to certain skills that are required for independent study. They may lack autonomy, so they may still need guidance and support in their learning, and they may not feel confident to complete anything that is assigned for them for independent work. So this is, and they may require ongoing feedback. So it is really important to have a good sense what the students in your class are able to do on their own and what kind of supports they may require before you introduce the flipped classroom model. And another point that may actually come up when you use a flipped classroom model is the integrity of student work. Excuse me. So in that model, if you assign, for example, writing a draft of a paragraph or a draft of an essay, you may find that students were reaching for additional supports, either online or from or help from family members. So again, it's something that you may need to discuss in your class and be able to address with the students when they present the results of their assigned work in the in-class component. Now, before you really consider using a flipped classroom model for your course, it's a good question to ask yourself if this is something for you and as a teacher and for your class. So think about, it's really important to consider different possibilities in your course. Think about the format of your class. Does it allow you to introduce this model in a relatively smooth way? And is it something that will benefit your students? Do the students in your class have enough language proficiency to be able to complete the assigned tasks on their own? Do they have the digital skills that are required for that? And are they autonomous, independent enough to be able to complete those activities on their own, especially the online ones? And then think about the benefits that a flipped classroom can bring, uh, considering the profile of your class. So, for example, if you're teaching a class that has employment focus or a class that is skill specific for higher CLB levels, a flipped classroom can be very beneficial because it can equip students with new skills that they can apply in academic or professional environments in the future. And finally, the last point that is really important to consider is the prep time, because a flipped classroom, as it may sound attractive for you to use, it may require additional prep time, especially at the beginning. So you can get a feel of how much you need to prepare in creating or searching for materials. And if you're using ready-made materials, how much you need to spend to how much time you need to dedicate to supplement these materials with additional resources or additional activities. Now, again, just to talk about the students and go back to the students and the benefits of this model for students, I think the most important, and this is probably the most important aspect of a flipped classroom. So it is the process of becoming active learners, independent, responsible, and self-sufficient. Learners, through these assigned independent pieces of work, can learn to work at their own pace, can understand how they learn, what kind of supports they need. They can become more independent, as I said, and more responsible for their own learning. And in addition to that, they can notice that, especially at higher levels, that by practicing all the micro skills and specific items such as vocabulary or grammar before the practice time during the class, they can improve their fluency because there's more time dedicated to interactions with other students in class. And finally, another big benefit for students when you're using a flipped classroom model is extra linguistic skills that students can acquire in the process of working on their own and then in class. It is organizational skills, so the learners can organize their studying environment, they can manage their own time, teamwork. So when they work on projects or group assignments or even role plays, they have to communicate their needs and their comprehension, lack of comprehension. They have to negotiate the meaning. So all of it really builds their skills in a more natural environment that would be done in the teacher-driven teaching classroom. Now, pedagogical benefits. Again, as I mentioned before, a flipped classroom provides you with more time that is available for fluency building activities and skill using practice. So things that can be done by students on their own can be just debriefed, taken up at the beginning of the in-person class, and then the rest of this class can be dedicated to the skill using practice and tasks. Then another important benefit is the opportunities for individual attention and feedback. Because there's more time available in class and because you are able to see how students interact with one another within the classroom, you are able to provide that individual attention and feedback, which would not necessarily be possible or you would not have enough time to provide during your regular class. Now, also, that all that time available for the in-class interactions also gives you opportunities for more creative activities or tasks that are based on collaboration, cooperation, project work, group presentation, and so on. So it does make the class more lively, more engaging, and more rewarding for the students. And finally, time management. If you have lessons that require a lot of bottom-up processing. For example, teaching listening skills or writing skills and editing, the writing process. If you assign those specific building blocks of micro skills needed for this kind of task, you will have more time for the actual gist of this kind of lesson, which is practicing writing, practicing listening, developing specific skills. And this can be all done within class time. It happens very often that when we get into teaching and focus on those micro skills and the specific elements of writing or listening, we end up not being able to teach everything within one class time. We have to carry it over to the next class. And this kind of interrupts the flow. This way, if you assign some of the routine or focused structured activities to students to be completed outside of the classroom time, you can gain more time for those overall tasks. Now I'm going to jump back to Avenue and really talk about how you can use Avenue content for a flipped model, because you can use a flipped model with any content, and as I said, in any modality. But really, Avenue offers a lot of ready-to-use material that can be used as the background or basis for fluency and skill using practice with your students. Now, what is really important is to make sure that you have a good understanding of how e-units work and what they include, so you can see how that content that is included in there can be divided into asynchronous and synchronous components. So first of all, I think the best way to do it would be to go to the course builder and select e-units that you would like to work with. And then when you have a certain e-units in mind, just review the online content. So preview the activities first and see how long they take to be completed by students, by basically looking at the number of slides, and take a quick look at what the slides offer and see which of them would just lend themselves to independent completion by students. Then review the unit guide. A lot of unit guides included in e-units include tips for in-class teaching. There are sample ideas that are some examples of how you can build activities on the online activities. And there are also supports in form of scenarios, role play cards, images, and other tools that you can use for in-class teaching. And finally, plan a lesson. So decide what can be assigned as an independent work, and then whether this is enough or not to build on in your in-class lesson. If you feel that you need to supplement it with additional resources, look for those resources, and I'm going to talk about them in a moment. And then plan in-class activities and the actual practice of tasks or skills needed for tasks that would be used in your in-person class, of either virtual or in person. Now, before you really applied that flipped model with the content that you select from Avenue, it's really important to have a few things in mind. First of all, it's really important to make sure that students are able to work with the assigned content on their own. So the students need to be familiar with the platform. They need to be able to navigate the course page and specific activities, and they need to be able to complete certain interactions. For example, in H5P activities, they need to be able what to do and how to complete the activity on a slide. Now, they also need to be able to check their own scores. If they want to redo the activity, they need to know how to do it and how to check their overall progress. I think the best way to introduce students to all these elements is to demonstrate the activities online. And what you can also do with lower CLB level students is just to have this demonstration first before you assign um, any activity, any online activity to be completed independently. It can be done at the end of the lesson in preparation for the next lesson. So the students feel confident and they know how to complete the activity. You can also point the students to the Avenue help files because Avenue help files for students have a lot of content that includes tips on how to complete the specific types of H5P activities or how to navigate between the activities or how to check their score or redo the activity. And then another important thing that you will need to do is just have a discussion with learners about that flipped model. You don't need to use the term itself, but just introduce them to that format and tell them why you are introducing that format and what the benefits for them are. So it's really important that the students understand why they need to complete the assigned activities and they actually do it. At the very beginning, when you introduce this model, it may happen that some students will not complete the activities and they'll just come to the class. And I think it is a good idea just to make sure that everybody understands why they need to do it. So this way allows them to engage in practice and fluency focused activities rather than reviewing the vocabulary and grammar and so on. If it happens that a student or two come to class without the completion of the assigned activities, you can have those students work in groups of other students and ask them to um, either summarize of what was done or just provide some kind of a background so they have enough knowledge or background or the vocabulary or grammar to work within the in-class practice activities. And finally, it is important that you either teach or review certain learning strategies, studying strategies that the students may not know how to use, may not be available of, may not be aware of, but they may have the tools available. So these skills would include using a dictionary, searching online, conducting the online search on the internet, taking notes from listening or from reading, revising, reviewing, and so on and so on. Now, what I would like to do now is just show you a practical example of how you can look at a sample e-unit on Avenue and see how the typical e-unit is set up so you can actually use it in a flipped model. Many of the e-units that are part of the course builder have been designed with a flipped model in mind, which means that a lot of the activities that appear at the top of the list of all student activities um, are very suitable for that independent component, asynchronous component. And you can also see the progression when you take a very close look at the specific H5Ps in the order in which they occur. You can see that the ones that are at the very top are usually very structured, provide a lot of repetition, or at higher levels, they provide background information, background knowledge, and some vocabulary and grammar introductory items. And then the activities that follow actually build on that content. So one of the units that I chose is a flipped lesson using the CLB 5 to 7 unit. And this unit is included in the category called reading skills. The name of the e-unit is Reading Products and Service Reviews. So it is a reading focused unit, but it can be used for other skills as well. So let me just take you to this particular unit. Okay, so in this unit, just close this here so you can see better. In this unit, as you can see, there's a unit guide that gives you a sense of, I'm just going to open it so you can see what it includes. You can see uh, a lot of information that is present here about the unit. It gives you information about what each of the activities focuses on. So you can just either preview the activities in Course Builder, or you can go to the guide and read about the possible uses of this activity and what are the steps that the students need to take in order to complete that activity, maybe possible skills that they need to have, and also how this activity prepares students for the next one. So you can take a look at these descriptions, and then usually, sorry for scrolling, I know it's not the best way to do in the presentation. Then there's a whole section that is called teaching notes. Sometimes it says teaching ideas, and it just gives you examples of ideas of activities that can be used in the in-person component. So these vary from introductory warm-up activities to the activities that really apply the skills that were learned by students online. So again, quite a lot to choose from. And this is something that you can review before you actually start teaching or even planning the unit. Then as I look at this particular unit, I can see just by looking at the titles of activities and types of activities, I can see that the activities that are in here at the very top are the activities that segue into the topic and introduce the concept of product information, product reviews, service reviews. So this is something that can be assigned to students to be completed outside of the class time. So the first one is just a survey, which is a quick way of checking how much students actually know about that. And then a forum is just a platform for students to share their experience with reading product information. It's a warm-up activity that can be used on its own, or can be used as a step to the further discussion that happens in class. And then another activity that can be assigned to students to be completed independently on their own is Introduction to Product Reviews. Just wanted to show you what it involves. It involves really a set of slides that prepare students for the topic and provides them with background information. So let me just see. So in here, there is vocabulary that the students will build. There is a podcast that they can listen to. They can look at the transcript. So as you can see, there are many supports that students have at their fingertips that they can use when completing this on their own. And when meeting with students in class, in person, you can just review or debrief the information that they have learned in here, as well as the vocabulary they have built throughout the activities. So I just wanted to show you how much of that content is included in this particular activity and how much the students can actually complete on their own. Now, let me go back to the unit. Okay. Looking at the rest of the activities, you can see that it's quite a lot, and it can be divided into 2 or maybe 3 lessons. So having this initial part of the unit assigned to students to complete on their own, you can then move on to reading different types of reviews, focus on finding information in a review, and then just end your lesson with that. Focus on different strategies, reading strategies such as skimming and scanning, and then maybe do a reading practice task or assessment task. Now, the other activities that are in here can be assigned as well, but they don't necessarily need to be assigned together within one lesson. They can be done during the next lesson and prepare students for other writing tasks that they're doing later. So there are many options. And as you can see, you can use one unit in several lessons. You can use the activities that are available here in different order, rearrange them, change the focus at the same time, spending the in-class time on something that really requires interactive participation of students, not just the passive kind of completion of activities. So let's go back to the presentation. You'll see that here is the summary of what I demonstrated in there. So as I said, the sample assigned work in this unit would involve completing the survey, the form activities, and then the introduction to product reviews. So this is the listening that is done to gain background information and some vocabulary. And then in class activities, you would debrief the assigned work, focus on reading skills practice, and that activity focuses on different types of reviews, have a class discussion and pair work or small group work that focuses on reading skills, skimming and scanning. And you can supplement this component with additional internet resources that you may come across and finding information in a review that is again another H5P activity available there. Now, going back to another demo, I also wanted to showcase the lesson for a lower CLB level. This time it is home and community theme. It's a unit about caring for the environment developed by CCLB. I wanted to say that most of the units, if not all, developed by CCLB actually work very well with in the flipped classroom model because they were developed for blended classrooms. So not all units have the same format and the same style. You probably have noticed that when you have gone through course builder and sample units. But these units typically work really well in a flipped classroom model. So here again, we have sample assigned work. You could complete a forum to introduce the topic and two vocabulary practice activities. And as you can see, these activities are not long. They're pretty short. They don't take a lot of students' time. They can be completed, I would say, within 15 to 20, 25 minutes. That's max. And then the gist of the activities is completed in class. So here it's always important to debrief what was done by students independently. And then the focus would be listening to instructions, listening to conversations about reducing waste, having the discussion or review of this activity, group work, and maybe use the listening dialogues in this particular H5P as models so the students can actually create their own role plays. And finally, you could end that up with the class pronunciation practice, where you could model pronunciation for the specific items and have learners practice in pairs, and then assign an H5P with pronunciation practice for independent work as home, and ask students to search for a garbage collection calendar for their community, either online or bring print version of it. Very often this calendar is distributed to tenants or residents in different areas, so students can look for it, or they can search online if they have digital skills and abilities to do that. So let's take a look at that particular unit very quickly. I just wanted to demonstrate. I'm going to go to the course builder really quickly and find this particular unit. As I said, it's home and community, and then CLB 4. And let me just see it. There it is. So as we look at this unit, you can see again, there's a e-learning blended module package. So in here in this unit guide, you can see the whole setup. I'm sorry again for scrolling, but I just wanted to say it very clearly tells you signals which part needs to be done in class and which part can be done online. And the part that is done online can be assigned for independent learning. So you'll see that throughout the whole unit. And then let me just close this. Sorry, just close the unit. And then here, when we look at the section for learners, you can see again, introduction. In some units, it's called learning or to learn. And then this signals that this is something that can easily be assigned as an independent piece of work to be completed by students in asynchronous time. And then all the other components would need to be done in class. So this way, looking always, as I said before, from the top down in each unit, the activities that start the unit usually signal the vocabulary or grammar practice that is built on, and the other activities use as the basis. Okay, so let's now go back to our presentation. Now, what kinds of activities typically work well as independent work assignment? I think it's really important to focus on the activities that can be completed by students without challenges, without additional tools, and without and with confidence. So without fear that they won't be able to complete it and get the score that is needed. So as I mentioned before, ideal activities that work really well for as an asynchronous work, independent work, are the activities that are skill building activities in e-units. They can be, typically there are forum activities, sometimes there are surveys, sometimes there are H5P activities. These activities can be also supplemented with other activities that exist online that you can search for and either include the link for those activities in your course, in your unit, or just have them maybe include the links to those in blocks and then have direct learners to go to those blocks to complete these activities. You can also embed them. So this way the learners will never have to leave the course page and go to another web page to complete them. The vocabulary activities that work really well for that purpose, especially for lower CLB levels, are the activities on Ellie, and that's a platform that is commonly used by many teachers. Quizlet. The Quizlet includes some activities that are already available. They were created by other teachers, but you can also develop your own. And Learning Chocolate, which is really almost like a picture dictionary with audio and some dictation exercises. Grammar practice, again, you can direct students to specific websites that focus on grammar practice and interactive activities. The one that I like using a lot is the University of Victoria Study Zone that includes a lot of grammar content by levels and by grammar items. And it's interactive. It always provides the explanation and the practice activities. You can also provide other online resources that make learners aware of the background information, or the factual information that introduces the topic. So there are different web resources that are available through reading or listening texts. For example, if you're teaching an employment, a class about different job interview styles, you can search for specific web pages and send learners to those web pages to read the information and maybe take notes. It is important to engage learners in something that would be a takeaway from reading that page of text or listening to something or watching the video. You can also use listening or reading texts as models for role plays or monologues that they will be working on during class. For example, a website that I included here is a collection of different conversations or monologues. Again, these are grouped in at different levels, so students can work independently on them. These audio materials are accompanied by comprehension exercises as well as vocabulary practice. So it's something that can be easily done by students on their own. Unfortunately, these last three bullets, the completion of those activities is not tracked within the Avenue platform. So that means that you won't be able to see whether the learners have actually completed them, but you can prepare questions that would just elicit answers that would indicate whether learners actually have completed them or not. And finally, oh, there's one more item that I forgot to mention here, but when it comes to grammar, you can also prepare screencasts or record a voiceover for an explanation of a grammar point. So, for example, if there's a grammar lesson presenting a grammar point in a clear and very easy way that can be understood by students, what you can do, you can just record your voice with it. So students are provided with multiple ways of learning that content, not just by reading, but also by listening to it. And here's just to collect all the good practices in a flipped classroom that I mentioned before in the presentation. So again, when you decide to use this model of instruction, it is important that you explain the purpose, the benefits, and your expectations to the students before they are assigned work on their own, so they don't feel lost. They don't feel like this is something they cannot do in the classroom. They know that this is something they will be building on in class. Then when choosing what to assign for independent work, keep in mind that it's always better to flip less communicative learning activities to free up the in-class time for communication practice. So the activities that focus on vocabulary, grammar, first drafts of writing, outlines of presentation, drafts of elevator speech, or responses to interview questions are just a few examples that indicate what can be flipped, what can be assigned for the asynchronous component. Then provide opportunities for students to build some degree of independence, autonomy, to work on their own, to complete work within a certain period of time, and to be able to review their work, check the score, and redo it if necessary. Then another point that is really important to note is if you choose to use a flip model class, you don't have to flip every single lesson in your course. You can choose to use that model occasionally whenever appropriate and see how it works. If it doesn't work, use that hamburger model that I mentioned, which is asynchronous, synchronous, and asynchronous again, components that will prepare students for a flipped model because it provides more in-class debriefing and communication built in. And finally, just to recap what we have covered today in this presentation, if you would like to use a flipped classroom model in your course, consider pros and cons of that model, how it would work for your class and its specific conditions such as timing, your teaching style, the students in your class, including their CLB levels, their digital skills, and their independent learning strategies and skills. Review available materials and plan what to use in an asynchronous and synchronous component. Decide on the amount of asynchronous work assigned to students. It should always be a small component in comparison to the in-class component. Use asynchronous work for skill building activities and in-class time for further practice. skill using tasks, and fluency building interactions. And finally, debrief and check in with students to ensure that this model works for them. It may work for you and it may look like everybody's happy with it, but just to ensure that all students equally benefit from this model, it is always a good idea to have a conversation with students, with the whole class, and check in with them. Here are a few references that you can use if you're interested and would like to read more about this particular model of teaching. And finally, there's a time for you to ask questions if you have any. I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you. John, do we have any questions?
Margaret, I am absolutely sure this time that there were no questions in the
Okay.
chat window.
Okay.
So if you want folks to ask questions of Margaret, just turn on your microphone if you wish, or type in the chat window.
Well, thank you for spending your time here in our webinar, and you will be able to access the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. And also it will be posted in both instructor forums on Avenue as well. Thank you very much.